reasoning as well, okay? But what science is reasoning about is what we'd call what is observable in the physical world. They are observing the physical world, and that is what science talks about, okay? They observe the physical world. And through testing and experimentation, okay? Experimentation, there we go, okay? They develop certain scientific theories that are based on the physical world, what can be observed. But this is the big point. Science stops there, okay? Science only discusses what can be observed. If it cannot be observed, okay, science cannot say anything about it. It can speculate, it can do what it tries to, but if it cannot be observed, then it cannot be discussed in science yet, okay? Now, I also want to point out what can be observed and what is being considered physical, okay? That has changed quite a bit since the time of Aristotle, okay? We have our powers using telescopes, using magnification, all these different things, electron microscopes, things like this, have allowed us to observe more and more and more. So the realm of what is observable has obviously increased over the years. But one big point I want to say is that science and philosophy used to be the same thing. It wasn't until the scientific revolution and bringing in the scientific method that Galileo and Newton were using until it becomes something separate. That is the point where science sticks to only what can be observed. Now, so that question kind of puts it like this is, well, is there anything left over that philosophy can talk about? And yes, there is. There's many things philosophy can talk about. You know, philosophers used to talk about the stars and how they worked and physical reality. A lot of philosophers still talk about that, but that has kind of been reserved for the place of science. But where science ends, that is where philosophy really begins. Because, for example, there are many things you can observe. Here's one. Questions on God. Okay? God. Okay? God is something unobservable, if he or she or it exists at all. But since science can't observe it, they can't say anything about it. Philosophy, we are the ones going to concentrate on this. Many of the things associated with the soul, okay? That's another thing. Do we have a soul? Do we not? That is a place that we are going to talk about. Also, one big thing we'll talk about in here is concepts, okay? What are the meaning of concepts? For example, science has to deal with the physical world, but a philosopher might ask something like this. Well, what is the physical world? What does it mean to be physical? Okay? What would it mean? How we would explain that? Other concepts such as what does it mean to be maybe a human being? Okay? Now, maybe science says something, a human being has these certain characteristics, and this is what we call it. Now, that's what science is, but what philosophy would do is, well, is that really the case, or is there something else essential about us? Philosophy would look towards that place. Another big place that we'll talk about, we'll see as big, is things like death, okay? Science can't talk about death. It can say what happens to the body, but what happens to human experience after we die? Is there something? Is there not something? Death is something philosophy will talk about. Here's some other places, and we'll see this soon. What does it mean to know something? Now, science will say certain things like if you can observe it, things like this, if you can test it, that means you know it, okay? Philosophy may have something else to say. What does it mean to know, to actually know something, or the difference between knowledge, belief? This is what philosophy would talk about, so, in knowledge, right? Now, there is one, I think, major question that science cannot answer that many people sometimes forget, and that is this. Well, actually, I can use two philosophers here. Let's use Wittgenstein first, okay? Now, Wittgenstein said this: if science, let's say we go long enough into the future, and science eventually discovers everything that could ever scientifically be understood about the world. So every little section of science is now complete. Something like the theory of everything exists, okay? If science was able to explain everything physically observable, would it solve the problems of living? What do you think? Okay, and some may despite and say something different, or it depends on what you think, but as a philosopher, I want to point out this, that even if we could have everything understood scientifically, it would not solve the problem of living. Yes, I know why gravity falls to this point and where it comes from and all these things, but what does my life mean? What job should I take? What career path should I go on? Who should I marry? Should I fall in love? Should I not fall in love? What is the meaning of my life and the end-all, be-all? The meaning of existence. That question would not be solved by science. And who helps with the meaning of being? the philosopher. In my opinion, I think that is what fundamentally a philosopher does, is tries to grasp the meaning of existence or the meaning of being. Okay? So here we go, the meaning of being. All right? This reminds me of another great Danish philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard. Okay, and he talks about the difference between the objective and the subjective. It basically means this: objective in this case could stand for science. Okay, he says it could be great, all right, that you could understand exactly how the world works. You have the objective understanding of everything, but the subjective part, which is my personal experience, he says if I cannot get my subjective side down, then the objective world doesn't mean squat to me. Because here's an example. I'll take a psychiatrist. Let's say a psychiatrist, she's well-renowned. She helps people who had bad relationships. She helps them get straight, find better people. She is just renowned for it. Okay, so objectively, she knows what to say to somebody. But subjectively, in her own life, she can't hold a relationship down. She's an alcoholic. She struggles with her confidence and all these things and can't heed her own advice. Kierkegaard would say this: she may have the objective understanding it down, but she cannot bring the subjective meaning. What does her life mean? Where should she go? She can't figure that out. This is what philosophy is for. To just try to help us with the meaning of being. And science is just a place it cannot reach. Okay? So philosophy actually has a lot to do. A lot. And one comment I have to say, there's not many scientists who are like that. None of the good ones, I will say. But there are a few scientists, philosophers out there who say something like this: that if it's observable, then it exists. If it cannot be observable, then it does not exist. Okay? Now, science, I want to say, a good scientist could only say this: we can only observe the physical, and what cannot be observed, we have to just say, I don't know. And I think that's what most good scientists do say. They may have conjectures about it, but the moment they begin saying something else, that what is observable is, and what is not observable is not, does not exist, the moment they do that, they step out of the realm of philosophy or science and go into the realm of philosophy. They're giving an understanding of existence as a whole. Can you prove that? Could you ever prove that only the physical exists and nothing else? Well, you can't. Okay, it's impossible to. You have to assume it. A scientist who does it is assuming something, and at that point, I don't think they're doing science anymore. They're now giving something like a philosophical belief, and that's much harder to prove, as we'll see. Okay, so that is the major difference here between, as we'll see, between philosophy on its own, okay, and science, which is the one I think can be the most confusing one, but also between religion and mythology as well, which all these things in our classes we will discuss again. Okay, so on the next section, we're going to talk about basically some kind of stereotypical things and problems people kind of bring to philosophers. And then we'll also give a rundown of the 5 branches of philosophy that we kind of classically understand. Okay? So I'll see you in part 3.